Hi, this is Colin Sandberg from Backbone Performance, and today we're going to be doing an indoor workout focusing on pedaling technique and economy. Today's workout is going to take a lot of discipline on your part. Very easy to cheat, so to speak. One of those things you won't be able to see exactly what you're doing as much as you will be able to in other exercises. So it's really important for us to use these indoor workouts as an opportunity for us to work on the things that we don't get a chance to work on most of the rest of the season, like pedaling technique and pedaling efficiency or economy. We're going to start off with 5 minutes easy pedaling. I'd say just keep your RPM probably over 85. Make sure everything's set up on your bike. You've got plenty of ventilation. With indoor workouts, it's absolutely critical that you have good ventilation on you. Nice, powerful fan, kind of simulating the breeze you would have on the road. You really shouldn't be seeing a whole lot of sweat pooling on your skin. You shouldn't be seeing a lot of sweat on the floor in a puddle there. It should be all kind of evaporating off of you, ideally. Now, you're never really going to be perfectly cooled indoors like you would be able to be outdoors. So it is important that you exercise in a relatively cool room if possible. I'd say 50 to maybe 55 to 65 degrees. If you have it as warm as you would normally have your house, say 65 to 75 degrees, then you're probably going to be overheating a little bit. But even then, even if you're nice and cool, if you don't have a good fan, if you don't have good airflow, you'll be probably overheating. You will probably want a bottle of water, probably a bottle of energy drink. I will usually go through in a typical hour-long workout, and yesterday's workout will be about an hour long. About 2 bottles, 2 large bottles, 1 of water, 1 of energy drink. Some people like to drink all energy drink. I like to have some water to alternate it with so my lips don't get too sticky. But again, we've got to take advantage of the opportunities that we have in these indoor workouts. It's very easy to stop the workout at any time and go get a drink, go refill your bottles. You never have to worry about traffic. You've got these nice intervals, work intervals, and then rest intervals. So lots of opportunities to drink. You never have to worry about going down a descent and trying to drink at the same time or something like that. A lot of people will do these workouts either in the early morning or the evening, so maybe before breakfast or after they get home from work, before dinner. And you want to be careful there. I think you want to make sure you have something to eat before the workout starts. Otherwise, even with an hour workout, even with a workout that's not incredibly difficult, and today's, like I said, we're going to be focusing on technique. It's not incredibly difficult. If your glycogen stores are depleted before you start, you could be in trouble. You could be really suffering more than you should be at the end. So you don't need to eat a full breakfast and then hop on the trainer, or eat a full dinner and then hop on the trainer, but something simple like an energy bar, a pack of energy chews, even a gel, or if you're doing this in the evening, making sure you have a couple snacks in the afternoon. So what we're going to be doing next are going to be some one-legged drills. We're going to go 1 minute on the right leg, and then clip both legs in, 1 minute on both legs, and then 1 minute on the left leg, going kind of back and forth, but giving you a nice break in between legs. So we're going to be starting the first one-legged drill, starting with the right leg in about 10 seconds here. Alright, and let's unclip your left leg, just pedal with the right leg. Probably want to keep your RPM right around in the 80s, I'd say, but take note of where you're at, because something really important here is that you want to have the same resistance and the same RPM for both legs. So pedal nice and evenly, be aware of the pedal stroke, be aware of the whole pedal stroke and what it takes. Just pushing down with that right side, going under the bottom part of the pedal stroke, pulling up, coming up over that dead spot. And for most people, where they're going to fatigue first is at that top spot, over that, what we call the dead spot, where you use mainly hip flexors to get over that. Okay, and now you're going to clip both legs in. Just recover. You really don't need much resistance here. Just a little bit. Some people may have a tendency to want to give it a little bit more resistance because they feel like they get a bit more feedback that way, and they feel easier with these technique drills. But again, you got to have some discipline, and really use this as an opportunity to work on technique. For those of you that have strength discrepancies, one leg is stronger or more coordinated or more efficient than the other, these are great. And for most of us, once the season starts, we don't have a whole lot of chances to work on this stuff. So take advantage of it while you have it. And also, right now, not much intensity in this workout. I like that. Okay, so unclip your right leg, left leg only here. For me, my right leg is dominant, so I really know I need to focus on the left leg and making sure that I'm pedaling just as hard, same resistance, same RPM with that left leg, and I'll start feeling my hip a lot sooner in that left leg. Some people will be basically the same, but try to know yourself, try to know where you're at, and what your strengths and weaknesses are. If you don't work on this stuff at all, you can have problems, and they can get worse and worse every season. And clip both legs in. What you're looking at here on the screen is just a helmet cam video from last spring that I did with the young medalists, the junior cycling program that I coach. Nothing related to this workout. Honestly, it's really just something for you to look at while you're riding. I've done a little bit of recording these classes and then showing that, but honestly I think people would rather look at people on the road, look at good helmet cam footage, even if it's unrelated to the workout, than people sitting on indoor trainers. Sitting on an indoor trainer doesn't really look like much. Back to the right leg, unclipping the left leg. One thing people ask sometimes is, where do you put your hands, where do you put your leg that's not clipped in during this? And what you'll want to do, right now you're pedaling just with the right, so you want to rest that left leg. Probably most trainers have something that hooks into the rear skewer on the non-drive side, so you can just rest your left leg there. You don't want to have your leg out to the side. You don't want to have it out to the front. If you do that, you have more of a chance that your crank arm and your pedal spinning around, you can whack yourself in the shin, or whack yourself in the calf, or some people just have their back leg, their leg that's not clipped in, dangling around, and it can go into the spokes or something. So obviously don't want that. Alright, both legs in. And sometimes we'll go back and forth with the two legs without having this intermediate period, but for now, early on in the year, just want you to get plenty of recovery in between exercises, plenty of time to relax, so you can kind of center yourself back on the saddle, grab a drink during this recovery, and get ready for the next one. And you'll get a really good sense of if you have some sort of discrepancy between the two different legs, efficiency or technique or whatever. Okay, left leg only here. Unclip that right leg. Talking about discrepancies, some people have actual leg length discrepancies. Sometimes that's caused by, in fact more often it's just caused by a hip imbalance, a hip misalignment. You may notice that based on how you stand. You always tend to stand on one leg. You may notice that you don't sit in the saddle perfectly straight all the time. Or you may notice that you feel like you're reaching more with one leg than another, or you feel twisted on the bike. And sometimes it is an actual discrepancy. Very often after surgeries in particular, people can have one leg that's longer than the other. Okay, let's clip both legs in and recover. So, if you do have one leg that's longer than the other, what very often can happen is that the longer leg is a bit stronger or puts out more power. You can get more leverage on the pedals, so you put out more torque on that side, but it's less efficient. The shorter leg, keep in mind, it's not just about getting leverage when you're pushing down when the crank arm is forward. It's also about being able to pull up. And if your leg is shorter, you'll have actually an easier time getting up over the top, over that dead spot at the top of the pedal stroke. And that's where you may notice here you start to fatigue, and a lot of people will start to hear a clunking over the top, that clunk, clunk, clunk. Okay, unclip that left leg, right leg only here. Concentrate on pedaling nice circles. Make sure that you're at the same RPM that you were with the left leg. And if you have a weaker leg, just try to keep it at what you can do with that weaker side. That's fine. Slow it down on the stronger side, even if you can do more. I guess I shouldn't say stronger and weaker sides, I should say more efficient and less efficient sides. Alright, let's clip both legs in now. This ride is in the Lehigh Valley, by the way, and I apologize that the camera's a little bit tilted and a little bit low. The helmet cameras don't always have well, at least mine does not have a good way to see it before you go home and download it. So if it's a little bit off with the alignment, you're probably not going to notice until afterwards. So hopefully it doesn't bug you too much. I'll be adding more and more of these from training rides, from races as the season goes on. Okay, left leg only. Just the left leg, unclip the right leg. Some people have tried these exercises on rollers. probably would not recommend today's exercise on rollers. Not necessarily because of these one-legged drills, but because of the efficiency drills we're going to do later on. You certainly can't do anything that's high torque, low cadence on rollers, but high cadence stuff where you're really spinning fast and technique stuff like this can be very good for the rollers. Okay, both legs in. The dimension that the rollers add to it is that you're having to balance yourself. So, you can be really inefficient on the regular trainer and maybe leaning to one side or just not really balanced correctly, and you'll never know it. Rollers, you need to engage your core muscles. It adds a balance aspect. And just like adding a balance aspect to any exercises you do in the gym, doing push-ups with your legs on a stability ball instead of doing regular push-ups, adds a balance aspect to it and makes it a little bit more difficult. One-legged drills are particularly tough, so you'll want to have some experience on the rollers before you try that one, but it can be done. All right, now for the main set. You're going to bring it into zone 2, and I'd say 90 RPM. And what you want to do is you really want to concentrate here not on the up and down motions of the pedal stroke. You want to think about those side-to-side, those horizontal movements in the pedal stroke. Basically, you've got the main dead spot at the top, getting over the top, and you've got a lesser dead spot at the bottom. Those are the two transitional areas of the pedal stroke, and all you're doing really here is just concentrating on those. So don't even worry about pushing down, don't worry about pulling up. Think about top and bottom parts. If we were to break the pedal stroke down into 4 components, think of those two. Think horizontal, the forward, and the backward movements of the pedal stroke. Most people, of course, do the opposite, which is why we're working with this. They just think about the pushing down, maybe sometimes think about the pulling up, but not so much about those transitional places. You use a lot of hip flexor, you use a little bit of calf muscle. Those are the weaker muscles in the legs that here we're really focusing. So, a little bit more about the rollers. Really good thing to have, I think, for a lot of different exercises. Not everything. I do recommend, if you're trying to choose either a trainer or rollers, get the trainer, because that's going to be a lot more versatile for indoor workouts. But I think it's nice to have both. Good way to work on technique. Also, for a lot of you, you're not riding much outside during the winter. Sometimes not at all in the wintertime. So it's good to still have something you're doing with a balance aspect to it. Can help you hold your line a little bit better. You may notice you come into races early season and you see a lot of people that might be strong but looking a little bit sketchy, not holding their line so well. And that can often relate to they've been riding an indoor trainer all winter. So you ride rollers, a little less chance of that. Most rollers have very little resistance, and like I said, they're good for technique stuff. I like to do, if I'm doing a recovery ride indoors, I like to do it on the rollers, work on leg speed. If I'm doing a technique workout, such as fast cadence drills and one-legged drills, I like to do it there. But like I said, you do need to watch out with one-legged drills for a couple reasons. one, you don't have that back part of the trainer to rest your leg that's not clipped in, so it's a little bit more difficult, so you kind of have to keep it backwards and balance that there. A little more chance that your back leg could get caught in the spokes or caught in the derailleur or something. You don't want that. And of course, especially once you start to fatigue, you can start to kind of hop around on the rollers, and potentially ride off them. Now, in all fairness, most of the time you ride off the rollers, it's really no big deal as long as you see it coming and you can unclip one leg and put a foot down, or you see it coming and you grab onto something to stop it, which is certainly something I'd recommend when you're first learning how to ride rollers. Just have something close by, have a bar or a wall or a chair or a couch or something that you can hold on to when you're first starting. When you get more experience, you may not need that. You can kind of just straddle the bike, clip in on one side, start pedaling with the one leg, and up you go, and you clip in on the other side. And that's another thing that is challenging when you're first learning, is getting in on the other leg. Or if you're doing one-legged drills, obviously here it's not what the exercises we were doing before, it's not a big deal because you have that in-between period. But if you were just going straight back and forth between left leg and right leg, it can be difficult. It may take a few seconds to find that pedal, and you got to slow down a little bit and get clipped in. You may miss it the first time, and so forth. As you get more experience on the rollers, you can try things like going out of the saddle. It takes a little bit of extra coordination and balance. You can try riding with no hands. The thing I've heard that some very advanced people are doing is actually playing video games on the rollers. And it may not sound like much, but something you don't notice when you're playing video games is how much you move your head and your body. So it can be, it is extremely challenging to do that. You don't believe me? Try it sometime, but be careful. Be careful. All right, so this not too exciting of a workout, but you do need to be very disciplined about your pedaling and really just constantly focusing on that technique. It's not that hard of a workout. It's never going to get any harder than Zone 2 here, but focus on those dead spots in the pedal stroke and focus on pedaling evenly with both legs too. So when that left leg is going forward over the top, that right leg is going over the bottom part of the pedal stroke. Kind of opposite movements the whole time. Almost like you're shuffling back and forth. There's a couple things you can imagine here that may help. You can imagine that your foot isn't allowed to touch the sole of your shoe, if that makes sense. So you're almost trying to keep it pulled up and not heavily weighted. That's one of the main things we really work on with pedaling technique here. A lot of people think it's learning how to pull up with the pull up on the pedals so that you have a perfect even power around the whole pedal stroke, and that's actually not what you want. You're never really going to achieve exact even power the whole way around the pedal stroke, because that would mean that essentially you're able to put out as much force continually with your weaker muscles as with your stronger muscles. And your hip flexors, your calf muscles, they're never going to be as strong as your quads and hamstrings. And that's fine. They just need to be reasonably strong so that you can take the load off of those strong muscles for a little bit of the pedal stroke. And really what it's about is unweighting the back leg so that you're not hurting yourself, meaning you're not working against yourself. So if your right leg is pushing down, it's not so much that you want the left leg pulling up and adding to the power so much as it is that left leg kind of being nice and light and getting out of its own way, so that you're not having to, in addition to the force required the power required to push the bike forward and fight all these opposing forces, you don't want to have to fight the weight of your own leg. Just kind of want to unweight it, get it out of the way. And that's an area where, for those of you that ride fixed gear bikes for training or ride track bikes, that's very, very useful, because with a fixed gear bike, pedal, as long as the wheel's spinning, the pedals are moving. So at higher cadences, it's very, very important to get that back leg out of its own way. And you kind of just naturally learn that with riding, because if you don't, the bike hops is very inefficient. Okay, 5 minutes recovery here, zone 1. You can bring down the RPM a lot. You shouldn't need a ton of recovery from these intervals. They're not, obviously not super, super hard, but just kind of use this to relax. Don't have to worry about technique so much. Just let the legs spin out. Maybe towel yourselves off and grab a drink, grab a couple of chews or whatever. If there's anything sore, you can stretch a little bit or just rub out the sore area. We have a 5-minute recovery block here. So if you are, I guess a couple other words about rollers. Rollers have different diameter pins in them, or different diameter rollers. The bigger they are, the less resistance. And traditional rollers have very little resistance. In fact, when you see roller races, which is a fun thing you'll see in the wintertime sometimes, those rollers have practically no resistance. Those old wooden rollers that you see used to be kind of carnival or boardwalk or fair attractions where you'd see people, kind of like the, I don't know what they're called, but when people balance on top of the rolling logs, just so little resistance that the balance is really tough. Those are more traditional rollers, and very good for leg speed stuff, very good for technique work. When you get to the smaller pin, the smaller rollers, those have a little bit more resistance. So, and some of the, like the Kreitler Dynamite rollers, very small. You can get a decent amount of resistance with them if you need to. I use the in-between size, so not the really big ones, and not the really small ones, but ones, I want to be able to essentially be able to do an endurance ride without having to be in my biggest gear or having to be at over 100 RPM to get enough resistance. For those of you that have power meters, very good to have those hooked up, as well as your heart rate monitors for these indoor workouts. When I talk about the different zones here, we're in zone 1 right now. The main intervals in this exercise, in this workout, or at zone 2, really I'm talking about power. Heart rate can be a bit deceiving, especially indoors, because if you're not well cooled, and even if even if you're sitting in like a 55 degree room, you got plenty of ventilation, you can be overheating a bit. Plus it's the off season, you might not be quite as efficient. That's understandable. It's probably going to jack your heart rate up a little bit. So definitely a little bit better to look at the power meter if you have it. And if you don't, the one thing that's nice about doing an indoor trainer workout is your speed is typically aligned with a certain power. In other words, if you have, it's not always going to be true if you have different resistance settings on your trainer, but for a given resistance setting, or certainly if you don't have a resistance setting, a given speed equates to a given power. So you don't know exactly what that power is, but you can kind of figure it out by default and say, okay, I know this feels like, going by perceived exertion, let's say 20 miles per hour feels like mid-zone 2. Something like that. And you may not be completely right, but better than just looking at heart rate. Okay, so now we're going to go back into the next interval, zone 2, 90 RPM. Same thing this time. Focusing on the dead spots in the pedal stroke. Bottom and the top. Horizontal pedaling. Yeah, so the nice thing about kind of trying to equate a given speed to a given power is it's the same every time. So, if you are those of you that do have power meters know that if you're at zone 3, let's say, and you're nice and fresh, that may not feel like much. But if you're pretty tired, it's the end of the workout, or you're really fatigued going into it, that can feel like a lot harder. So you know that if you're at a certain power, or if you're at a certain speed in a certain resistance setting on an indoor trainer, that's pretty much always going to be the same. I will just give a little bit of warning there that some trainers, especially fluid trainers, the fluid in the resistance unit warms up in the first 10 minutes, so it may not always always be true. And at least with mine, I have a Cyclops fluid trainer. The resistance is a little bit lower for the first 10 minutes, and then the fluid warms up, or maybe it expands a little bit, and you'll start to feel a little bit more resistance. But after that initial 10 minutes, it's okay. A lot of people ask about which trainer to buy. I do like the fluid trainers because it's more quiet and it's more of a road feel. It's an exponential resistance curve, meaning as the speed gets higher, the power gets exponentially higher. And if you think about it, that's really what you have when you're riding on the road. For instance, because of the wind resistance getting higher and higher, it's more going 20 miles an hour is more than twice as difficult as going 10 miles per hour because the wind resistance. And it's just like, you can think of eventually that wind resistance overcomes everything else. Like if you're skydiving, or if something's falling, eventually it hits terminal velocity because the force of the air resistance against the falling object is equal to the force of gravity. The fluid trainers, they're nice and quiet. You can get enough resistance on them some trainers for the lower RPM stuff, you're not going to be able to get as much resistance as you need. And for you juniors, that can be especially a problem if you only have a junior cassette on your bike. And I do recommend that, although I think it's very important for juniors to train on junior gears, not just race on them, in the winter time when you're doing a lot of these indoor trainer workouts, you may actually want to use a senior cassette, meaning a cassette with an 11 or 12 on it, for these indoor trainer workouts. Because if you don't, and I might say, okay, you want to be at your threshold, zone 4A, zone 4B, at 50 to 60 RPM, well, junior gear, junior cassette, you may not be able to get that. You may not be able to get adequate resistance. Alright, so stay focused on your pedaling here. Really stay focused on that efficiency, stay focused on those horizontal movements, stay focused on going evenly with both legs. Making sure that you are, remember we're talking about pushing and pulling. Pushing forward, pulling back. The other parts of the pedal stroke, that pushing down and pulling up, kind of just let your legs float through those sections. But you should be pushing just as hard as you're pulling. You're pushing with both sides the same amount. And make sure you stay hydrated here. Make sure you stay toweled off. Be conscious of your body position on the bike. You don't want to have a death grip on the handlebars. You don't want your shoulders to be rocking. You want your butt to be pretty much firmly planted on the saddle. Your hips to be nice and level. Again, look at these indoor workouts as a chance to work on some of this technique stuff. A chance to do these things that you don't normally get a chance to in the season. You know, if I'm going up a hill in a race, trying not to get dropped, or trying to attack, start a breakaway, or bridge up to a breakaway, trust me, I'm not thinking about pedaling evenly with both legs. I'm not thinking about trying to pedal efficiently. I'm just trying to get there by any means necessary. So you don't think about that, and even when you're riding outside in general, you're thinking about cars, you're thinking about traffic, you're thinking about other riders, you're thinking about the workout at hand, thinking about balancing, staying on the bike, looking ahead, thinking about where you're going, not necessarily so much on efficiency. I am really excited to see the new Garmin power meter, the new Garmin Vector, but of course we don't exactly know when that's going to come out. As of November of 2012, today, that release date's been pushed back indefinitely. So we'll keep waiting patiently, and we'll see what happens. But I think a lot of people are excited to see when that comes out, because it will actually give a separate force reading on the left and right side. So you'll be able to see not only your power, but the split of that power coming from the left and right. And that's something nobody's really had before. If you've used CompuTrainer spin scans, you can look at percentage from the left and right, but it's not actually measured. It's estimated based on where you're at in the pedal stroke. You know, you've got a cadence sensor there that it assumes is on its the back chainstay, and you have the power being read every split second or whatever from the back wheel. And from that, it's kind of making some assumptions. One of them is that both legs are in, and you're trying to look at whether the power split is even on the two different sides. And I'd say to a certain degree, it's accurate. Certainly, if you really focus on one leg, you'll see it shoot up. But it's not actually measuring power, which the Garmin Vector is going to have individual force sensors on both sides. And I think when that comes out and more people start using that, I think it's really going to be something that the people look at and gets more attention in the sport of cycling. You know, keep in mind, you don't need to be pedaling evenly with both legs for the bike to move forward. You can be pedaling 90% with one leg and the bike still moves forward, which is great, but it can also lead to a lot of inefficiencies. A lot of discrepancies. Over time, that can get worse and worse. Strong leg works harder because it can, and it gets the gap gets even further. Like a stone. Alright, back into recovery. Just relax for 5 minutes. I've said try to keep it at over 85 RPM. That's kind of a rule of thumb. Really, the important thing here is that you relax, you stretch out if you need to. If you need to fill your bottles, or you need a little bit more time, I'd suggest that you pause this and come back. These recovery intervals are important. It's not just like you want to only focus on the work intervals. You need to focus on the recovery intervals too. And now's a good time to start practicing that. When you get into the harder intervals, you know, what you're doing in those recovery intervals and how fast you can clear out that lactic acid out of your muscles, how fast your heart rate can come down, that is very important. It's something you want to look at. And that reminds me, too, that a lot of people don't look much at heart rate once they get power meters. And although there are a lot of limitations to heart rate monitors, heart rate can be very affected by the heat, by your hydration levels, by fatigue levels, and by fitness. And of course, heart rate from one person to another is really not something you can compare. You know, one person may have a lactate threshold of 150, somebody else could have a lactate threshold of 185. And it doesn't mean either one is better than the other. They're just different size hearts, different ways of acting. So you kind of need to know your own zones for you. So there's a lot of limitations to heart rate monitors, but they are still useful. And I really would say, even if you have a power meter, keep that heart rate monitor on. Pretty much every power meter system has a way where you can look at both, and you can get a lot of good information there. You know, you may see, for instance, indoors, hey, your heart rate's a lot higher than it should be. That could be a sign that you're not well cooled. Usually is a sign that you're not well cooled or not well ventilated. You may notice that early on in the season now, your heart rate's higher than it should be. Probably means you're not in great shape yet. Or it's not coming down as fast as you would expect it to after you do hard intervals. Again, the better your fitness is, the faster you're going to be able to recover. And in reality, it's one of the things we forget. It's not just about how much power you can put out. It's about how you recover from it. So very often in the season, we'll see is like somebody gets stronger, their lactate threshold raises in the early season, and then their lactate threshold power kind of plateaus, meaning that they can sustain for a period. But that doesn't mean they're not improving, because if you can decrease the time it takes for you to sort of get back to a more normal state, or decrease the time it takes to repeat an effort, then that is improvement, even if how hard you're going in that effort doesn't change. It's really important to remember that races are often not really won by the people that make the hardest efforts, but by the people that can repeat that effort the most times, or they can repeat it with the least recovery. And one of the good signs of that is looking at your heart rate and saying, okay, I did this, let's say VO2 max interval, and at first you do the same interval at the same power, and it may, if you're not in great shape, it may take you a few minutes for your heart rate to get back down to normal. If you're in good shape, that might happen in 15 seconds or something. That's a huge, huge advantage in a race situation, to be, at least when we're talking about road racing, huge advantage. It's not usually the first breakaway attempt that works. It's you have a counter and another counter and another counter, and each one stretches it out a little bit more, and finally there's one that snaps the elastic. Okay, here we're going back into the last 10-minute interval, zone 2, 90 RPM, and really think about these two parts of the pedal stroke that I was talking about. Pulling back at the bottom, forward, pushing forward at the top. Those horizontal movements. Gotta stay focused here. Again, this workout takes a lot of discipline to focus on that technique. It's not just riding at zone 2. It's a matter of mentally thinking about your technique, thinking about working on those dead spots in your pedal stroke, thinking about trying to pedal more efficiently and pedal evenly with both legs. What the ultimate goal of working on pedaling efficiency here is to be more economical. And that means that basically there's energy lost. Whenever we talk about efficiency, we're talking about how much goes in versus how much comes out. If you had a factory, you can think of an efficient factory as somewhere where you've got all these raw materials and you've got all this work that people are doing. You've got goods partially made, raw materials moving around the factory, all these movements, all these actions that are happening. So, in an efficient factory, you have very little waste. You don't have, almost all of the raw materials that come in get used. They're not thrown out. Almost all of the work that people are doing goes directly into making a product. Or another way to put it is, to make the product you're making takes the least amount of work. There's not many unnecessary movements in there. When we talk about pedaling efficiency, you got to keep in mind that not all of the work you do on the bike goes into moving the bike forward. If you are pushing straight down at the bottom of the pedal stroke, well, you're pushing, you're applying force to the pedals, But that's not moving the bike forward. That's like just pushing up against a wall. Same thing if you pull straight up at the top of the pedal stroke. A lot of the side-to-side movements you have don't go into moving the bike forward. So the idea is just, at least when we talk about mechanical efficiency here, that most of the work you're doing a very high percentage goes into actually creating power that moves the bike forward. That's the goal. And if you have one leg, the back leg, that can't get out of its own way, and it's actually creating resistance the opposite direction of pedaling, not efficient. You're working against yourself. You're applying forces that are not in the direction you want them to be. When we talk more in the general efficiency standpoint, and not just about the mechanical efficiency on the bike, you can think about how much oxygen does it require for you to put out a certain amount of power. And of course, you want it to require the least amount of oxygen, because ultimately, at higher intensities in particular, that's going to be the limiter. Is how much oxygen you can consume and process. That's why we look at VO2 max. That's very important. So, if you're more efficient, teach yourself to be more efficient. It doesn't require quite as much oxygen to do the same amount of work. Same thing with energy consumption. Think about your muscle glycogen, or wherever the energy is coming from. If it requires less energy to do a certain amount of work, then you can either do more work, or you can save your energy, save your muscle glycogen stores in particular for when it's more important. And especially if you're doing a 5, maybe 6 hour road race, you need all that energy, because you can only take so much in. So if you're blowing through your muscle glycogen stores, you don't have that for when you really need it, which is going to be the decisive moment of the race, or the attack, or the climb, or lining up for the sprint, wherever it is. The other thing, getting back to mechanical efficiency, is that there's always going to be some energy lost in the system. There's always going to be some forces that don't directly contribute, or don't contribute at all, or sometimes work against your pedaling, and that's, you're never going to be 100% efficient. The idea is just to get it as high as possible. But with mechanical efficiency, you can think about every time you pedal, every time you go around the pedal stroke and you have 1 RPM, 1 revolution, should I say, there's energy lost, there's force lost in the system there. And that means that the higher your RPM is, mechanically speaking, the less efficient you are. So, let's just think about it in simple terms. You've got a dead spot in your pedal stroke. The most significant dead spot for most people is at the top of the pedal stroke, and that's part of what we're focusing on here in this workout. Every time you pedal, you hit that dead spot. So if you're at 120 RPM, you hit that dead spot twice as often as at 60 RPM. The higher you go, the more often you hit it. The closer you get kind of to that terminal cadence where you just can't go any faster because you can't get out of your own way fast enough. You can't pedal efficiently enough. If you were perfectly efficient, you'd be able to pedal, in infinite cadence. But nobody can really do that. So we work on getting those dead spots less significant so that faster, more efficiently. And that's, in particular for you juniors, and you've got junior cassettes, you're limited to the biggest gear being a 5214, you know that a lot of races come down to who can pedal the fastest. If it's a flat sprint with a tailwind or a downhill sprint, you're spun out. A lot of flat races, the faster ones, junior fields, they're spun out the majority of the race in the hardest gears. So it really comes down to how fast can you pedal and how efficient can you be at those fast RPMs at 120, 130, 140, 150, 160 RPM. You get to that point working on your efficiency, and it's in a lot of different ways. Part of it is doing the fast cadence drills. Some of it is doing one-legged drills. It might involve riding a fixed gear bike. It might just be doing endurance rides at a faster RPM, 100 plus RPM, and practice doing that. A lot of different ways, kind of attack it from many different angles. Alright, good job. We're going to go into the cool down here. 5 minutes, zone 1, spin those legs out a little bit, and just relax and cool down. Again, cool down, very important part of the workout. A lot of people neglect it. They're thinking about getting to work, getting to school, getting to dinner, whatever it is. It's only 5 minutes here. Don't neglect it. Let yourself cool down at least a little bit. Reduce the risk of injury, and let your heart rate come down. Spin those legs out a bit. If you don't do that, there's a better chance that, or a higher chance that your legs might tighten up after a workout, especially with an intense workout. Today's workout wasn't particularly intense, but challenging in a different way, hopefully. And as we go through the season, you'll see more and more intensity, more and more challenging technique drills. But start small, start with achievable goals. You should get in the habit of having a recovery drink within 30 minutes after the completion of your workout. It doesn't necessarily need to be much, and today's workout wasn't super hard, so it's not as critical as for a high-intensity workout, but you should still get in the habit, and it may be something small, maybe a small glass of chocolate milk, or a glass of orange juice, or Coke. Don't combine all three, by the way. Some people like the recovery drink powders, something like Endurox or Ultragen, or a lot of, pretty much every cycling nutrition company has products, and they all pretty much work. Some of them have protein in them, some of them don't. The important part is sugar. What that sugar does is it keeps your metabolism kind of revving. You get done a workout and your metabolism is revving. You want to keep it revving so that you recover faster. If it drops off really quickly, you don't feel hungry at first, and then you'll be starving a few hours later. So very important to have something, and with a smaller workout, a shorter workout, or a less intense workout like this, it's not as critical that you have a big recovery drink. You can have